All right, welcome back, sports fans. It's Ben the Bike Coach, and I haven't made a YouTube video in a very long time, but I thought in celebration of the summertime and some of the things that we've been working on at the organization that I work with and how we're bringing things together in a new way, I wanted to share some of the things that I've been exploring, learning, thinking about the last 4 years as a student at Royal Roads University, pursuing a degree in master's or pursuing a master's in learning and technology, specifically exploring why coaches in Canada are achieving certification in what is called the National Coaches Certification Program, or the NCCP. I wanted to understand if it was the way the learning is designed and how blended learning is incorporated into coach education. Is that positively impacting certification rates, so the completion of the 40-hour program? Or is it a little bit of economics, consumer behavior? And do we need to take those into consideration if the goal is to increase certification rates or participation rates? Or could it be a third element, personality traits? And is there a combination of traits that are common in certain types of coaches? And how does that affect participation and certification? So I wanted to say a big thank you to Dr. Russ Wild and Dr. Carl Storchman, who were my advisors on my thesis research. And today I'd like to share with you the slide deck I used to defend my thesis in March of 2025. And if you'd like to read the thesis, it's available through my LinkedIn profile. And let's let's go. Let's have some fun. What if? What if sport is a story? A story that helps us learn from others, listen, play, reflect, and improve. A story that helps us master new skills, to find our voice, and take on new responsibilities, all in environments that shift and become more random as we grow. If so, then sport is a story we can all engage with at any age. And through sport, we can become storytellers. We can become great storytellers as great athletes, or even help narrate someone else's story as great coaches. And as participants or spectators of this story, we can all bring our own unique characteristics to the experience. But at the minimum, we expect our athletes to work hard, to try the best, and perform with grace and courage. And we expect our coaches to role model those same attributes, but we also need them to be knowledgeable, to delegate, to guide, to mentor, or instruct as needed. So, helping ensure coaches are well prepared and they receive high quality coach education is paramount to helping sport continue as a valuable story, a tool we can use to help us learn and share with one another the skills we need for life. But Canadian sport coaching is facing many difficulties. Over the past decade, across 4 sports and at least 14,000 coaches, only 5 to 15% have finished their 40-hour education program, known as the NCCP Competition Introduction Program, most commonly associated with club coaches who work with ages 10 to 16, or adults who are in the first 5 to 6 years of their sporting pursuit. And indeed, for both groups, this is a very impressionable age when the athletes are sponges and the coaches range from volunteer parents to full-time paid staff. Now, across these 4 sports, including cycling, athletics, cross-country skiing, and ringette, 11 to 35% of the coaches who started their journey were able to successfully attend and complete all of the modules. So that would mean they achieved trained status. That's quite a large discrepancy across the 4 sports. However, when we just look at those who achieve trained status and then they converted to getting certified, The range is much smaller, on average 31 to 37% of all the coaches who achieved trained status converted and finished their certification, indicating that indeed there are widespread issues across education for all these sports, but perhaps some similar challenges associated with evaluation. Yet, research from the Coaches Association of Canada, Baker and colleagues 2021, showed that 58 to 55% of NCCP respondents intended to achieve trained and certified status, respectively. So 58 and 55% compared to 37 to 11%. Okay, there's a bit of a discrepancy there. And in light of the pressure from rival options, including programs that help people develop skills as an instructor or a fitness trainer, or apps and social media channels that provide free or low-cost access to vast sums of information, the NCCP is no longer has a monopoly on the structure of coach education or control over the flow of knowledge. Indeed, Baker and colleagues 2021 showed the perception of the NCCP is waning due to unnecessary or overlapping content, poor facilitation, barriers to evaluation, unclear pathways, high costs, and high time commitments, all of which is exacerbated when provincial and national organizations fail to create incentives, or even worse, there are no policies that encourage coaches to pursue certification. But the NCCP is trying to understand the issues. For example, Gerges and Callery 2022 explored all three levels of the NCCP, the community, the competition introduction, and the high performance, to understand which learning outcomes were unnecessary or insufficient. And they discovered that across a moderate survey of 85 respondents and 24 interviewees, some sports have focused too much on the tactical or on the technical aspects of the sport, but also that participants appear to lack an understanding for the greater structure of the NCCP, and that further evaluation of the program is needed. So after working as a sports administrator and a coach developer for a decade, during which time I've been fortunate to receive great mentorship, achieving all 5 NCCP certifications and teaching many courses, I received an opportunity to create a national coaches certification program with an instructor style education experience using a blended learning approach, including on-demand e-learning modules, printed resources, video library, followed by a 2-day in-person experience and an 8-week mentorship program follow-up. And in the process of creating that program, it really opened my eyes to the world of instructional design and the necessity of designing what is best to be included in a textbook or in a video or lecture, as opposed to what's best learned through experience and reflection. And that's why I wanted to go to Royal Roads University, so that I could make a contribution to the sport landscape, to expand my understanding of teaching and learning, and to reflect upon my own experiences, perceptions, and to listen to coaches outside my professional sphere in cycling, and to better understand why coaches achieve certification. Missed a couple bullet points there. There we go. So, does achieving certification have something to do with combinations of face-to-face, online, and on-demand e-learning? And how much do current programs differ from the recommendations of the literature? Here we see a summary of all the different sport programs. There's 10 sports here compared to the recommendations. Feel free to pause the screen. We're looking at face-to-face time, online learning time, and offline learning time. Looks like, what was it? I think snowboarding is the one that's closest to what the literature recommends. Or perhaps it has something to do with consumer behavior. And can that help us discover patterns? For example, How many hours should the program be? How many modules should be included? Is there a certain number of transactions or the presence of incentives that can impact engagement in the learning? Here we see a wide variety in the duration, the number of hours in programs, also the rates in which people get trained or certified. Or finally, could it be that there's more individualistic factors associated with personality trait expression that's driving coach behavior, including their interest in learning? Are there patterns in the types of people attracted to sports coaching? And if so, are there ways we can better accommodate those learning needs so coaches finish their training? This illustration here shows that, at least in the data set, there was a bit of a pattern associated with coaches who were a little bit higher in openness, a little bit higher in conscientiousness, agreeableness, and extroversion, and they have a little bit higher emotional stability as well, which shows here as low in trait neuroticism. So my research question was, in what ways might various factors impact coach competition certification rates since 2014? More specifically, my research questions include, how might blended learning delivery methods support coaches pursuing certification? In what ways are the impacts of consumer behavior considered in the NCCP learning design? And how might the five-factor model of personality traits forecast coach participation and certification rates? This research adopts andragogy and constructivism as its theoretical framework. Andragogy is rooted in the self-actualization philosophies of Maslow's humanism and Dewey and Lindemann's emphasis on building knowledge through experience. These ideas include preferences for autonomy, recognizing motives and experience, and ensuring the learning is problem-based, so learners are motivated. It's relevant to the research as it matches the theoretical frameworks of the NCCP, which references the work of Darkenwald and Miriam, 1982, that suggests andragogy can help both child and adult learners achieve success, as it aims to increase competencies that create versatile individuals who can solve personal and communal problems. The second theoretical framework is constructivism, and that builds upon the rationalist view that knowledge develops through reasoning and associating meaning with experience. That's from Etmer and Newby, 2013. Formulated by Piaget, Vygotsky, and Dewey, constructivist learning theory focuses on the process of learning rather than the impact of learning environments. And it is relevant to this research because the NCCP is also formulated on constructivist learning and aims to develop humility, curiosity, and a lifelong learning mentality among coaches. That's from the Coaches Association of Canada in 2021. This is evidenced by the presence of NCCP learning facilitators in the learning space, whereby we are expected to, in this order, guide, mentor, and instruct if needed, to optimize student engagement and role model dealing with conflict and fill knowledge gaps, and finally, demonstrate clear and congruent examples of teaching. Since this case is very context specific, is bounded by specific types of coaches over a specific time period, and the results of which I didn't have a lot of preconceptions going into it, a case study methodology was used. Yin 2003 defines case study as an empirical inquiry that investigates a contemporary phenomenon or the case within its real-life context. And it's helpful for when behavior of the participants cannot be manipulated. Moreover, Tisdale and Merriam 2016 suggest case study methodologies when it is challenging to separate influential variables from a given context. This methodology provides the freedom to find patterns of correlations within the data without the demands of proving causality. Moreover, this case study methodology factors in the idea that there are likely many factors contributing to NCCP participation and certification rates, and that that this research did not capture, which in terms of the statistical models will be expressed in the error term. Moreover, since this research first conducted a quantitative research survey using an original design to which the research results of initial analysis informed who we would invite to follow-up interviews, this constitutes as an explanatory case study method. In the context of Yin 2003, explanatory case study is not inherently constructivist, but by focusing on the subjective experiences and the meanings of individuals within their social context, this model of study can connect to constructivist theoretical frameworks like the one used in this study. For example, Baker and Jack, 2008, shares that explanatory case study can help us discover presumed links of real-life interventions that are too complex for survey or randomized experimentation, supporting the importance of this research interview process and analysis. Here's that bullet point I was looking for. In summary, 67 coaches from 11 sports completed the research survey. This includes 26 non-cycling coaches who were eligible for interviews, but after initial analysis of the data did not indicate the presence of large outliers, interviewees were selected to equitably balance NCCP status, gender, coach type, and geographic area. However, when only 6 of the 10 identified respondents confirmed and attended their interview, selection criteria for interviews were reduced, and eventually 24 of the 26 non-cycling coaches were invited until we reached our goal of approximately 10 interviewees. Our analysis used a quasi-experimental approach, which can help assess patterns when randomization is logistically or ethically impossible. That's from Harris, 2006. Or when sample sizes are smaller, randomizing location and subjects is challenging, and ethical considerations factor into data collection, also Harris and colleagues, 2006. Since the research was time-bound and it was not possible to establish a control group, this research did not qualify as purely experimental. Our regression modeling used both a binomial logistic regression to explore correlations between the factors of the likelihood of achieving trained rather than in training status. So did they finish all the modules versus just taking one of the modules? That was shown in our regression model number 1. We also had a second model that looked at those people who finished all the courses and then they converted to certified status. Our last model used a multinomial logistic regression, and that included the entire data set of 67 observations and explored the likelihood of holding in training status, trained status, certified status against the number of factors, resulting in an odds ratio that illustrate the likelihood of each variable influencing membership in each of these 3 categories of NCCP status. In the spirit of incorporating constructivist principles into this explanatory case study and celebrating the subjective experiences and larger meanings shared by the interviewees, a thematic inductive latent analysis was used in the second phase of the research. Braun and Clark, 2006, defined thematic analysis as a method for identifying, analyzing, and reporting patterns or themes within the data that minimally organizes and describes your data, and thus provides an accessible and theoretically flexible approach to analyzing quantitative data. However, Naff and Breitmeyer, 1989, cautioned that especially in the presence of case study methodology, adequate transcription, coding, and triangulating of themes is necessary to discover patterns of behaviors and perspectives, especially when seeking convergence and confirmation of ideas from small interview samples. Faraday and Muir Cochrane, 2006, explained since no categories or themes were chosen beforehand or a priori, which would be a deductive approach, the themes were able to emerge through the interview process, and this aligns with our inductive approach. Moreover, the semi-structured nature of the interview created at times sporadic jumps of thought and emotional answers that were not always expressed in complete sentences. Therefore, a latent level analysis provided the researcher, me, with the ability to extrapolate and discover larger meanings. Conversely, future studies that utilize detailed written reflections may discover different insights through semantic analysis. In summary, the process used attributes from two frameworks for thematic analysis. First, I manually transcribed and engaged with the data deeply, recommended by Braun and Clark 2006, before weaving the analytical narrative over two significant revisions. Whereas jumping between the interview topics or nodes and writing analytical memos associated with initial chapter drafts and subsequent revisions and compressions of meaning, used inspiration from Miles et al. Miles and colleagues at 2014 framework. Limitations to acknowledge include selection bias associated with just a modest research advertising campaign. So 111 people started the survey. We had a relatively small sample size that negatively impacted the results of two of the three models. So that'd be model one and number two, whereby they failed the Wald's test. There is a presence of confounding variables as explored in the detailed appendix and through our discovery of those variables in the correlation matrix analysis. There is also bias, though, in the sample, with a high number of certified men who completed their certification before the widespread adoption of learning blends. Moreover, in the context of thematic analysis, we should be mindful that establishing clear definitions and context is important during the interview process and analysis, and we should aim for a bigger data set and asking questions that help respondents quantify their experience. All right, so let's look at the results. Although the design of the original survey did an insufficient job of helping respondents use the survey to articulate how much their coach education program used blended learning, we were able to get that information from the interviews. But the information on how the NCCP could explore a different way of incorporating the blended learning was explored fully in the literature review, referencing other people's work and how future revisions may better match outcomes and preferences with different learning environments. That said, of our three models, model 3 indicated that coaches who self-identify with preferences for learning by doing, also known as kinesthetic learning, in fact has a lower likelihood of achieving NCCP higher statuses. So moving from in training to trained to finally certified status. So a 1 unit increase in preferences for kinesthetic learning decreased the odds of achieving a higher status by 74%. And this is interesting because one, that more than 70% of the sample indicates a learning preference, despite that concept now being discounted as a neuromyth. And two, if the program is designed to create sport coaches who facilitate through movement, yet the group that most prefers to learn through movement are unlikely to continue, it seems that there's a little bit of a disconnect between the coach education designers and the participants. Unfortunately, the remaining variables we collected, like if they preferred certain learning blended formats and then they were able to participate in those formats, indicated some correlations in table 19 in the full thesis. But in terms of the regression, we weren't able to incorporate them because those effects were subsumed or absorbed by other independent variables. However, Model 3 did illustrate that achievement in education, so academic success, did significantly express a correlation with achieving higher NCCP status. So moving from high school to an associate's degree, to a bachelor's degree, to a graduate degree, increased the odds of achieving trained and certified status, respectively, by a factor of 1.74. Thematic analysis indicated that matching learning formats and goals is most helpful. This can include ensuring that pathways and content and goals are clear and relevant. For example, the coach knowledge triad can help categorize NCCP learning outcomes into either controlled learning settings versus what must be experienced as an active coach, which developed into a theme for high quality and accessible post certification mentorship. With regards to consumer behavior, especially in the context of how the NCCP pathways are designed and interpreted by coaches in training, model number one showed higher household incomes correlate with trained status compared to in training status by a factor of 3.3, meaning that for a 1 unit increase in household income using approximately $25,000 brackets, the likelihood of holding trained status increased by a factor of 3.3. In Model 2, we showed that the preference for self-identified incentives to achieving certification, which means if I identify that there's an incentive and I should go for it, then that increased the odds of achieving that certification by a factor of 5.2. Whereas coach type, or holding a part-time or full-time coaching position as opposed to a volunteer position, also increased the odds by a factor of 3.85. So regulatory policy or some other form of incentive appears to help convert trained coaches to certified coaches. Model 3 showed that gender male was significantly associated with achieving trained and certified status, respectively, compared to in training status by a factor of 3.7. However, discussed a few slides ago and shown in the descriptive statistics that there was a bias in the sample. So, however, that's because the implementation of learning and e-learning and blended learning occurred in around 2019 and 2020. Most of the men who got certified in the sample achieved that before 2019, whereas the men and women who participated in the survey since 2020 achieved there was an equal number of certified men and women in the research sample. So this means that to make this research more valid in the future, we need a bigger sample size so there's less bias in the sample. Model 3 also showed coach type is significant. Holding a part-time or full-time position increased the likelihood of moving through the NCCP program by a factor of 2.2. Thematic analysis showed that when learning meets coaches' needs, the experience is perceived as valuable, accessible, and incentivized. So for these customers, the idea of meeting their needs most often surfaced as a problem-based task that's easy to engage with, is priced accordingly, and acknowledges previous life experience, focuses on familiarity. So do I know and respect the facilitator, and when needed, using accommodations and policy. Many of these themes map on closely with the fundamentals of andragogy and constructivism, which were the theoretical frameworks of this research and the NCCP. In the context of acknowledging personality traits and of learners and coaches, Model 1 showed a near significant correlation for emotionally unstable coaches and those that complete all of the education modules and achieve trained status, compared to those not finishing the modules by a factor of 6. This is similar to the findings of Quigley and colleagues 2022 that showed neuroticism is inversely correlated with participation rates, but positively associated with a desire to learn and an ability to study, the latter of which is associated with andragogy. Of course, as we can see, the variable in our model 1 only exhibited a p-value of 0.08 compared to the preferred 0.05 threshold. Model 2 showed the presence of, I went back one. There we go. Model 2 showed significant correlations between emotionally stable coaches and introverted coaches and the transition from trained to certified status. For example, a 1 unit increase in neuroticism decreased the odds of holding certified status by 79%, and a 1 unit increase in extroversion decreased the odds by 87%, holding all other variables constant. So this would illustrate that coaches who are more prone to negative emotion or prefer to or or are able to expend less energy when being social, prefer to avoid, or perhaps on according to the sample, they remain in trained status and do not pursue certified status. Model 3 showed extroversion was also negatively correlated with achieving higher NCCP status, so a 1 unit increase in the 1 to 5 Likert scale impacts the odds of achieving NCCP trained and certified status respectively, decreased the odds by 68%. And finally, the discussion about personality traits helped the interviewees reflect on their own strengths and weaknesses, how they developed certain skills and behaviors as a coach, ways that they learned to mitigate and maximize their traits. And ultimately, the dialogue developed into themes that there does appear to be universal characteristics of coaching personality, including great interest in learning, which is openness, a sense of self, which is emotional stability, and emotional capital or agreeableness. Whereas there is also context specific traits that also appear to help coaches identify what level of athlete or environment they may prefer to spend their time in, as well as provide tools that can help them grow and change over time. So, conclusions. How might blended learning delivery methods support coaches pursuing certification? Well, one thing we could do is we could try to match coach education methods and approaches with someone's academic status, so take into consideration their previous learning. We could match learning outcomes and criteria as what can and needs to be taught in a controlled setting versus what needs to be learned through experience. We could leverage existing evaluation criteria to better split certification and professional development or mentorship, plus make the evaluation experience more interactive and engaging, and leveraged flipped learning resources to convey theoretical concepts. So that'd be a short little video that introduces you to the idea and let's come together to discuss in person. Failure to adopt such ideas could decrease the NCCP's relevance as a coach learning experience, given all of the other players in the market now. In what ways are the impacts of consumer behavior considered in the NCCP learning design? Well, perhaps the relationship between household income and certification can encourage sports to explore different pricing models. However, due to framing effects and brand inertia, grants and special discounts, it still may be insufficient to alter consumer expectations. Rather, if education was included in the cost of your sport membership, which would be a big paradigm shift. So I pay maybe a higher price for my annual membership, but coach education is a free service that I can engage in. If that type of paradigm shift occurred, it may help sufficiently alter consumer expectations and the perceived value of the program, or as a value add. However, clear, consistent, quality programming has surfaced as something that can be done and done much more simply. Perhaps policy from the Coaches Association of Canada that simplifies and standardizes the information, the infographics, and the pathways could also help. Examples from the literature include Kavanaugh 2000, Lepine 2004, and Haran 2020 that illustrates that reducing hindrance stressors associated with participation are significant and do impact dropout rates. whereas challenge stressors associated with performance do not impact certification, right? So this would mean we need to make it easier to reduce barriers to getting involved. The process can still be tricky, can still be hard, can still be challenging, but we need to make sure that there's less hindrances on getting involved in our program. And finally, this exploration also looked at the impact of personality traits on NCCP participation and certification rates, and there were some new patterns that emerged in the regression and thematic analysis. So with the patterns of neuroticism and extroversion and these other things, instructional designers could consider the work of McKenna, 2019, Vanderstrap, 2024, Barrett and Cohen, 2023, to better accommodate the needs of learners. On a more individual basis, coaches may benefit from understanding personality trait concepts to improve their intra and interpersonal knowledge, or choose a sport environment that helps them thrive. So in summary, according to this research, there are many opportunities for the NCCP to continue role modeling the lifelong learner mentality and grow and transform in the future. And that would be a great story indeed. So future research can explore similar themes, but with a larger sample size to understand if the patterns illustrated in this paper are indeed repeatable. Future research should also take greater time to craft survey questions that better quantify the presence and impact of learning blends. And further research can also explore if coach education's instructional designers are applying blended learning principles deliberately or by chance, or even if administrators are choosing convenience over effectiveness. One example would be reframing the NCCP coaching outcomes and certification criteria with the Collins in 1996 Coach Knowledge Triad, as well as Picciano's 2009 model that further builds towards a greater split between coach education and certification versus coach development and through post-certification mentorship. Exploring the proposed shape model, which was presented at the end of this thesis research, could be a helpful way to understand if there is a place for instructor training, as well as continuing to pilot the coach athlete personality assessment tool that I explored in this research program to help coaches improve their communication preferences between all the people in their sport. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope that was helpful and it was fun. Let's take a moment here to look at some of the highlights in the appendix. This is our regression model for model number 1. This was looking at the factors that impact a coach moving from in training, so they've taken one course, to fully trained, which means they've completed all of the modules. Here's model 2 that looked at the conversion from trained to certified status. So people have done all this work to take all these courses, and then did they get their evaluation done? And finally, model 3 that looked at the whole data set to explore if there are factors that help them move from one phase to another in training to trained to certified status. This is a summary or illustration of some of the codes that emerged. We have our big 3 themes. Learning format is optimized for the goal. We're meeting the customer's needs, and we're articulating personality trait knowledge as a tool to help people grow and improve rather than judge. And finally, our new idea, the SHAPE principle, sport, harmonized action plan for education, which explores how coaches and coach developers can show up to facilitate learning based on the presence of time, risk, and the maturity, motivation, and experience of the learners. And finally, I was able to create a fun little tool that is available on my LinkedIn and in my other social media channels that helps coaches identify where they're at with their big five personality traits and also some recommendations on how you can communicate with coaches or athletes. And it's a fun little tool. So that's the end of the show. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening in on my slide deck presentation for the defense of my master's thesis. And I hope to meet all of you soon one day, or if not, please send me a question on one of my social media channels. I look forward to supporting you in your experience as a coach, whether it's in the sports sphere or outside of the sports sphere. Until next time, ciao.